Get ready for a deep dive into a conflict that often gets overlooked. The First Kashmir War of 1947-48.
Yeah.
It's a part of the India-Pakistan story.
Yeah.
But this particular war is kind of in the shadows,
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to unearth some truly fascinating history, especially for those of you in India. This is going to resonate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, to understand this war, we have to kind of set the scene.
Absolutely.
Imagine the world right after World War II.
Yeah.
The British Empire. It's falling apart.
Yeah.
Anti-colonial movements are gaining strength. And India is right there on the verge of independence.
Yeah.
But it was a lot more complicated than just, okay, you're independent now.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So what was so complicated about Indian independence?
Well, the idea of a unified India, one big happy India was hitting a major roadblock. There were deep religious tensions. The Muslim League, they represented a big chunk of the population, and they were really pushing for their own separate Muslim state.
Right.
And this ultimately led to the partition of India and Pakistan.
Okay.
And that process, well...
I can already sense this is going to be a rough chapter.
Yeah, it was a really turbulent time. Violence broke out.
Yeah.
People were displaced.
Yeah.
The scars from that partition, they go deep, and they actually set the stage for the conflict we're about to explore.
So it wasn't just like, okay, we're drawing a line.
Right, exactly.
Everything's neat and clean.
Sure.
What happened to those areas that weren't clearly India or Pakistan?
That's where things get even more interesting. Several princely states, including Jammu and Kashmir, were kind of stuck in this in-between zone. Their fate was hanging in the balance,
Right.
It added a whole other layer of complexity to an already tense situation.
So let's zero in on Jammu and Kashmir, or J&K.
Yeah.
It wasn't just some random piece of land. It was a region with incredible geographical diversity.
Oh, absolutely. You've got towering mountains. It's divided into these 4 distinct regions. The northern areas, Ladakh, the beautiful Kashmir Valley, and Jammu. And that geography shaped more than just the landscape. It really influenced the cultures and identities of the people who lived there.
I was reading that back in 1947, J&K's infrastructure was surprisingly underdeveloped.
Yeah.
Most of the roads actually connected it to Pakistan rather than India.
That's right.
It was almost like J&K was caught in the middle, geographically and politically.
Absolutely. That geographic reality played a huge role in how things unfolded.
Okay.
But there were other factors at play, too.
Yeah.
Things that turned J&K into this powder keg ready to explode.
Okay, I'm hooked. What were those factors?
Okay, so picture this. A region with a majority Muslim population, about 77%,
Okay.
but ruled by a Hindu Maharaja Hari Singh.
Right.
And then you had Sheikh Abdullah. He was this prominent Muslim leader, but surprisingly, he was against joining Pakistan.
Interesting.
Throw in J&K's strategic location. It's like this gateway between India and Pakistan,
Right.
making it highly desirable to both sides.
Yeah.
Talk about tension brewing.
So legally, what could the Maharaja do? Like, could he choose his own path?
Well, he had 3 options on paper.
Yeah.
Join India, join Pakistan, or try to go it alone, stay independent.
Oh, wow.
He was leaning toward independence, actually,
Okay.
but things were way too unstable for that.
Right.
His backup plan was to align with India,
Okay.
but as you can imagine, that wouldn't sit well with everyone.
Right. You've got this divided region.
Yeah.
Political maneuvering, religious tension.
It was a recipe for disaster.
All the ingredients for conflict.
Yeah.
And of course, things did boil over in the summer of 1947.
That's right. The simmering tension in J&K, it just erupted into violence.
Yeah.
It started with clashes between the Muslim majority and the Maharaja's Hindu government.
Right.
The Muslims in the Poonch region, they feared oppression, so they started organizing, resisting.
Right.
The Maharaja's government demanded they surrender their weapons.
There's always a but. Right.
Well, of course. Rumors started flying that those surrendered weapons were being given to Hindu militant groups. The trust was completely shattered, and by August of 47, Poonch was in open rebellion.
To make matters worse, things happening outside J&K were fanning the flames.
Absolutely.
Reports of violence against Muslims in other parts of India.
Yeah.
They reached Pakistan and just fueled anger and outrage.
Yeah, it was a very tense situation.
And Pakistan didn't just sit back and watch.
Yeah, they didn't.
They started putting pressure on the Maharaja
Yeah.
by withholding supplies to J&K.
Mm-hmm.
It was like squeezing them from the outside while the region was already tearing itself apart from within.
Exactly.
And then you have one of the most controversial parts of this whole story,
Right.
the arrival of those Pathan tribesmen from Pakistan. It's a historical mystery
Yeah.
with two very different versions being told.
Oh, absolutely. Pakistan's story was that the Pathans, they were motivated by this sense of Muslim solidarity, a desire to help their fellow Muslims in J&K,
Right.
maybe with a little bit of personal gain mixed in there.
Yeah.
They insisted that this whole thing was independent of any official Pakistani involvement.
But India had a completely different take, right?
Oh, yeah, completely.
They said it was a planned invasion by Pakistan, even gave it a code name, Operation Gulmarg. They claimed Pakistan's goal was to seize J&K before India had a chance to react.
Yeah, that was their narrative.
It's like this historical puzzle, and some of the pieces are just missing.
Exactly.
There's no definitive proof to totally support either side.
The truth is probably somewhere in between, or maybe something else entirely.
Right. So those Pathans, their arrival, it remains this big mystery.
Yeah,
But whatever the truth is, their presence was a major turning point.
for sure.
Now, let's step back for a second and look at these two newly formed nations, India and Pakistan,
Yeah.
and their militaries.
Yeah.
They weren't exactly on equal footing coming out of partition.
Not even close. India inherited the bulk of the British Indian Army. More troops, more weapons, better infrastructure, a real air force. That was a big advantage.
Yep.
Pakistan was left with a much smaller, less experienced force.
Right.
And they struggled to find capable commanders and officers.
It's kind of wild to think about this.
Well,
Like, both armies were initially led by British commanders.
It is, yeah. It's this weird legacy of colonialism playing out in this new conflict.
It adds a whole other layer to this story.
Definitely.
So back to J&K. By September of 47, you've got these Pathan militia regularly crossing into J&K,
Yeah.
joining forces with the local Muslim rebels. The Maharaja's army was stretched thin, desperately trying to hold on.
Yeah.
It felt like a major offensive was just a matter of time.
And it was. On October 22nd, two groups of Pathan militia, about 5,000 men in total,
Okay.
launched coordinated attacks on J&K. One group aimed for the capital city, Srinagar,
Right.
while the other focused on key regions in the south.
And they were pretty successful at the beginning, right?
Oh, yeah. They quickly overwhelmed these outposts, helped by defections from the Maharaja's Muslim troops.
Okay.
The southern group, they captured towns, and they laid siege to Poonch, a very strategic spot. Things were looking really bad for the Maharaja.
Yeah, it was really close for Srinagar.
Yeah.
The Pathans got all the way to Baramulla just outside the capital.
Yeah,
But they messed up big time.
they did. Instead of pressing their advantage, going straight for Srinagar, they got sidetracked.
Yeah.
Looting, violence against the local Hindu and Sikh population. That delay, it proved to be a huge mistake.
Because it gave the Maharaja time. Enough time to send that desperate plea to India for help.
Yeah.
And in exchange, he signed the Instrument of Accession on October 26, agreeing to join India. Big decision. Huge consequences.
Yeah, definitely a turning point. And it led India to take a huge gamble, a daring airlift to Srinagar. They couldn't move troops quickly by land. The terrain was just too difficult, so they decided to fly them in.
An airlift. Tell me more about this operation.
Okay, so it was super risky. The airfield was limited, and you've got those Himalayan mountains. The weather could change in an instant.
Yeah.
But they pulled it off. Dakota transport planes, they ferried in companies of the 1st Sikh Regiment. And these reinforcements, they arrived just in time. Bolstered Srinagar's defenses right when the Pathans were regrouping, getting ready to attack.
Wow, so close. This set the stage for a huge clash at Shelatang,
Yeah.
just north of Srinagar. A battle that would decide the fate of the capital.
Yeah. The Battle of Shelatang, it's really fascinating because of the different fighting styles you see. You've got those Pathans, masters of guerrilla warfare, used to fighting in those mountains, going up against this disciplined Indian force, dug in, ready for a more conventional battle.
And we can't forget about India's air power.
Yeah.
A huge advantage over Pakistan.
Oh, absolutely. The Indian Air Force played a crucial role in disrupting that Pathan advance. The result, a decisive victory for India, broke that Pathan momentum and saved Srinagar from falling.
A real turning point in the war. From there, India starts pushing back, launches a counteroffensive, retaking key towns, driving those Pathans back.
It must have been a frustrating time for Pakistan. Their British commander, General Gracie, he was still hesitant to escalate things, refused to send in regular Pakistani troops. A missed opportunity, maybe, to really change the course of the war.
But the war was far from over. As winter set in, the fighting moved to those treacherous, snow-covered Himalayan peaks. New challenges, new surprises.
Yeah, can you imagine fighting in those frigid Himalayas? Temperatures plummeting, snow making movement near impossible, icy winds howling through the mountains.
Brutal. I think the Pathans, used to those harsh conditions, would have had the upper hand.
You'd think, right. But surprisingly, Pakistan couldn't fully capitalize on that advantage. The fighting kind of stalled out, a stalemate as both sides tried to deal with that unforgiving environment.
Meanwhile, up in the northern areas, things were heating up. The Gilgit Scouts, a local militia led by British officers, rebelled against the Maharaja. They declared an independent republic and later aligned with Pakistan.
Yeah, a big setback for India. The northern areas, places like Skardu, Kargil, the Zoji Pass, huge strategic importance. Whoever controlled those points could really swing the balance of power.
And Pakistan knew it. In February 48, those Gilgit Scouts, along with Muslim companies in the 6th Brigade, they launched Operation Hammer.
Right.
Their goal, capture Skardu first, then Kargil, then that all-important Zoji Pass, and finally Leh.
Ambitious plan.
It was. Their initial advance was fast. They quickly overwhelmed the Indian forces defending Skardu. It ended up under siege. Kargil and Dras were also attacked. Put a ton of pressure on the Indian defenders.
Yeah.
India tried to send reinforcements to help that besieged garrison at Skardu.
Yeah.
But they were met with fierce resistance. Those Gilgit Scouts, fighting on familiar ground, managed to defeat 2 Indian battalions.
They were tough opponents, especially in those mountains.
They were. But the Indian Air Force was crucial in keeping those defenders supplied. Even though they were surrounded, that Skardu garrison, they held out bravely for months. They finally surrendered in August. Kargil fell in May, then Dras in June.
Yeah.
The Gilgit Scouts were on a roll. Leh was their next target. But they ran into a wall, so to speak. A Gurkha battalion, tough Nepalese soldiers. They helped the Indian defenses and repelled that Pakistani attack.
A turning point on the northern front. The Indian Army regrouped and launched a counteroffensive aimed at pushing back those Gilgit Scouts who were dug in at that strategically vital Zoji Pass.
Now, this Zoji Pass, it sounds incredibly formidable.
It is. Imagine this narrow, treacherous mountain passage. Hard to get through even on a good day. Sheer cliffs, winding roads, a landscape perfect for defense. Like a bottleneck, stopping an enemy advance.
So how do you dislodge someone from a mountain fortress like that? A frontal assault seems impossible.
India first tried a direct approach with Operation Duck in September. But the terrain was just too much, and the attack failed. The Gilgit Scouts dug in, they held their ground.
So what did they do?
Well, this is where India pulls out a surprise. Tanks.
Tanks.
Tanks in the Himalayas. A bold move. They somehow transported this armored squadron of the 7th Light Cavalry to the Zoji Pass, moving them at night to avoid detection by Pakistani intelligence.
Wow, the logistics of moving tanks through those mountains, it must have been mind-blowing.
It was a testament to the Indian Army's determination and their ingenuity. And on November 1st, they launched their surprise attack. The Gilgit Scouts, completely caught off guard, had no answer to these steel behemoths.
What did they have to counter those tanks?
Not much, really. They didn't have anti-tank weapons. And their mountain defenses, so good against infantry, were useless against these armored vehicles. The tanks smashed through their lines, broke that stalemate, and allowed India to recapture Dras and Kargil.
Wow. That unexpected maneuver, it proved decisive on that northern front. But down south, India was also planning a major offensive, one that would tip the scales even further.
Operation Vijay. A powerful name for a powerful operation. By the spring of 48, the snow had thawed enough for larger troop movements. India was ready to strike back.
They deployed 3 brigades, the 50th Parachute, the 19th Infantry, and the 20th Infantry, along with armored support to retake that lost territory. Their first targets, Jagar and Rajouri, 2 strategically important towns held by Pakistan.
Yeah, those were key objectives.
Operation Vijay was a success. Indian forces, with superior numbers, equipment, air support, they pushed back the Pakistani defenders, recaptured both towns in just a few weeks. Jagar fell in March, Rajouri followed in April.
A series of victories that put a lot of pressure on Pakistan.
Yeah.
They had underestimated India's determination. They were facing a confident enemy, gaining momentum. They couldn't just rely on those Pathans and the Azad militia anymore.
So they finally did what they'd been hesitant to do for so long.
Yeah.
Sent in their regular army.
Yeah, the 7th Division was deployed to try and stop that Indian advance.
But was it too little too late?
Maybe. By then, India had the momentum. Pakistan was playing catch-up. Even with those reinforcements, they were facing a tough opponent, a well-equipped Indian army. As the war dragged on, the international community got nervous. This conflict, it was taking a toll. Casualties mounting, and no end in sight. The pressure for a ceasefire, it grew and grew.
By the winter of 1948, both India and Pakistan, they were feeling the strain of this long war.
Yeah.
I mean, these were new nations, right?
Yeah.
Still trying to find their footing. And this war, it was draining their resources. It was a distraction from all these other challenges they were facing.
Absolutely.
The fighting had also kind of reached a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Neither side was really making any headway. And that harsh winter,
right,
it made things even tougher for military operations. A decisive victory, it just seemed less and less likely.
Yeah.
It was stalemate, a very costly one. Thousands of casualties on both sides. A heavy price to pay for a conflict that seemed impossible to resolve.
And finally, after months of diplomacy and that mounting international pressure, a ceasefire was agreed upon.
Right.
January 5th, 1949. The guns fell silent along that disputed border. A moment of relief, but not a solution.
So what did this ceasefire actually do? Did it actually settle anything?
Well, the main thing was to stop the fighting, not necessarily to solve the underlying problems. Pakistan agreed to withdraw their forces from Jammu and Kashmir. India would keep control of most of the region, but they had to reduce their military presence. The final status of J&K, that was supposed to be decided by a future referendum.
A referendum that never happened?
Sadly, no. The First Kashmir War, all that bloodshed, all that sacrifice, it didn't really solve the core issue between India and Pakistan over this strategically important region, a dispute that still hangs over these two countries.
So how did things end up on the ground? Who controlled what parts of Jammu and Kashmir?
The ceasefire line, it basically divided Jammu and Kashmir. India got about 2/3 of the former princely state. That includes the Kashmir Valley, Jammu, and Ladakh. Pakistan ended up with a smaller portion in the west. Places like Gilgit-Baltistan.
A division that's still in place today, a constant reminder of this unresolved conflict.
Exactly. A frozen conflict. That heavily militarized line of control, it separates those Indian and Pakistani-administered territories. The dispute over Kashmir, it's still a major flashpoint. It fuels tension, and there's occasional outbreaks of violence between these two nuclear-armed neighbors.
Looking back, do you think either side could have actually won this war? Or was this stalemate just the only realistic outcome given everything that was going on?
That's a question historians and military analysts are still debating. India definitely had the edge at the start. Military strength, resources, especially their air force.
Right.
But Pakistan's irregular forces, especially those Pathans,
right.
They were tough, really tough, especially in those mountains.
I remember those early Pathan victories, how quickly they advanced towards Srinagar. It really caught India off guard.
Yeah, for sure.
But in the end, India's superior resources and their logistics, they were able to regroup, launch counteroffensives, and take control of a big chunk of that disputed territory.
On the Pakistani side, they had internal divisions, political uncertainty, all that hampered their war effort.
Yeah.
And that initial reluctance to send in their regular army, it may have cost them valuable time.
Right.
Missed opportunities, maybe, to gain the upper hand. It's hard to say for sure what might have happened if they'd done things differently.
This first Kashmir War, it might not be as famous as some other conflicts in the region.
Right.
But it was a turning point. For India, Pakistan, the whole region, it shows how complex that partition was, the lasting impact of colonial rule, the devastating cost of unresolved disputes over territory. And it's a story that's still unfolding.
It's a history with so many twists and turns, moments of brilliance, moments of blunders.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder how things could have gone differently.
It does. And for our listeners, especially those of you in India, this history probably has special meaning for you. We encourage you to share this episode, like it, subscribe to the channel. Let's keep talking about this.
It's a story that needs to be remembered, understood. It raises so many questions about conflict, nation building, the search for peace in a region that's been divided for so long.
And it leaves us with a final question to think about. Could either side have truly won this war?
Yeah.
Or was it all just destined to end in a stalemate? That tangled mix of politics, religion, geography was a frozen conflict, the only possible outcome. The kind of conflict that continues to shape India and Pakistan's relationship even today. We'll let you think about that.